Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, ships at sea, it is time for another episode of Property of the Week with PropertyLens. For those of you who don't know, I am Bob Frady, CEO and co-founder of PropertyLens. With me, as always, is
John Sigmund, president and co-founder of PropertyLens.
So John. We have a special guest this week. I am so
Yes,
excited.
we do.
Jeanne Glaser, who was a broker for Keller Williams in Des Moines, Iowa, has graciously chosen to appear on our show to give her opinion about what she sees from PropertyLens. So, Jeanne, take a second, describe yourself and all the magic that you're bringing to the table.
Sure. So I've been selling real estate in Des Moines since 2002. Prior to that, I was a social worker. The two blend together very nicely. You do a lot of marriage counseling when you're a realtor, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And my husband was also in lending since we graduated from college. So I feel like I've been around real estate in some form or another all my adult life.
Well,
and
there
I'm
you go.
currently managing about 225 agents in this office. So
Holy cow, that's a big responsibility.
it is. It's a lot. Yeah.
So are you still selling as well, or are you just mostly managing these days?
Mostly managing. I sell a little bit, mostly because it helps me, I think, know what my agents are facing out in the market. The fact that I'm doing it a little bit. I sell maybe 6 to 8 houses a year is all. So it's enough to keep my
that's
feet
a career
in the game.
for a lot of real estate agents.
Well, it is. Yeah, it is.
So how have things changed in the real estate industry since the settlement?
Hugely. And yet at the same time, not really. So there's new paperwork we have to do, new rules we have to make sure that we're following. And the hardest part of all of that has been trying to explain it to members of the public, who some of which don't have a clue that any of this happened. And others have read a lot in the media. They think they know what has happened, and they really don't have an idea, because I think the mainstream media really hasn't portrayed all of this 100% accurately all the time. They've sensationalized it a little bit.
What are some of the key points that our users should know?
So the first big point is if you pick up the phone and call a real estate agent and you want to go look at a property, if that real estate agent is not the listing agent, you're going to have to sign a buyer's brokerage agreement that talks about compensation just to go look at a house. We are required by the settlement and in Iowa by the state law to sign a buyer brokerage agreement before we open a door for anyone. So that's a big change for a lot of people. If it is my listing, I do not have to have that signed because I'm representing the seller and it's my job to get their house sold. So I can open the door and let a buyer come in and look around. However, there's limited information I can give them at that point and limited questions that I can ask them. It's merely here's the house, here's what's in it, thanks for stopping by kind of a thing.
Well, so are sellers still paying a broker commission for the buyer's agent, or how's that working in Iowa these days?
So per the terms of the settlement, I have to tell everyone that all compensation between agents and buyers and agents and sellers is fully negotiable and not set by law or practice. So there, I covered myself there. But to answer your question specifically, yes, I do think most sellers are still either offering to or agreeing to pay some form of compensation to a buyer's agent on behalf of the buyer. Sometimes we know what they've already agreed. Sometimes we don't. And that's between the seller and their agent, what permissions they're giving their agent to share with the prospective buyer or buyer's agent.
Well, it'll be really interesting to walk through this report then to get your perspective on what is shareable when you're looking at a house.
Now we we do always have a compensation either agreement as part of the purchase agreement or an amendment to the purchase agreement that discusses who's paying a buyer's agent.
Okay.
So it's always negotiable. Always negotiable. So
how much has really changed?
From what I see, and I probably do about 50-60% of all the compliance work in our office as well. So I see about that many of our transactions We got another team that does it too. I would say probably 75 to 80% of all transactions, seller is paying something towards a buyer's agent commission.
Okay. Alrighty. So here's what we normally do. We take an address, which Jeannie has given us already. We run it through PropertyLens, and then we show you the report, and you basically tell us what you think. If you like it, great. If you don't, great. Either way, we have strong hearts. We can take it. So, but the goal was to educate. 228 Northeast Pinehurst Circle in Ankeny, Iowa. It's a townhouse. It is 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, 1,600 square feet. And we pulled the report today. These reports are good for 4 months because underlying information can change. Do we have it right so far?
Yes. It is considered a detached townhome.
Yes.
Those classifications change from market to market. You know what I'm saying? Everybody's MLS calls things a little differently, but yeah.
Okay. So what we do is, and this happened in the background for the interest of time. We put the address in, you go through a process to buy a report, and then we send out all of our worker bees. It pulls all the data together, runs it through a bunch of rules, runs through a bunch of AI, and then presents this report. The whole process takes about a minute to generate.
It's
because we
crazy.
really sort of optimized it. And then, when we first built this, all we did was hand over data to people, and they said, we need some help. We need to know what to do about it. So we came up with lenses. The buyer lens is for people who are shopping. I'm thinking about a house. I want to ask a bunch of questions. The inspector lenses take a list of these issues and hand them to the inspector once I've decided to buy. And then the third is the insurance lens. What are some of the factors that might impact my ability to get insurance on this place? So, John, why don't you walk us through the buyer lens?
So on the buyer lens, we found 4 wind events over 65 miles per hour that have happened in about the last 5 years, starting in August of 2020. And wind, can be at times quite devastating to a property. So here are all the questions that we think should be asked about, siding, shingles, was there any damage, anything needs to be repaired. You can see in the upper right-hand corner of the report, it has been in an event where there might have been prior damage. Unlike a car on a Carfax that runs into another car and there's an accident, houses don't tend to run into one and each other very often. So we look at all the things that run into houses, like hail and wind and all sorts of other things like that. One known sex offender within a half mile of the property. That's actually fairly low. I did a commercial property in Reno just last week, and there were 82. So could be exceptionally, that's what I talked to, Gene. So, sometimes they're not in the best of neighborhoods. Roof is in great shape, at least good condition. We estimate it to be 18 years old and 8 years left on its lifespan. But it's something that you want to make sure, is it really 18 years old? Because if it is, I probably have to replace it in 8 years if I'm going to be there. We know the replacement cost is between $18,000 and $24,000. So you want to be, knowledgeable about the roof. Have there been any leaks? Have there been anything done to extend the life of the roof? All of those good things. It gets cold, it gets warm, it gets cold again, it gets warm. So you've got plenty of opportunities to create an ice dam. So it'd be something to check for. The better insulated the attic is, the less likelihood of that happening. Property, again, because it's in an area that gets really cold and stays cold for a while, has an opportunity to experience frozen pipes. You want to check for any of that being a previous event. And as we stated, it's got, high risk for being in a damaging hail event. So has it been, if it did, when did it happen? What was the damage to the roof and siding? Things along those lines. Property has a finished basement, so those are, much more prone to foundation issues, wall cracks, leaks, things along those lines. Because it's got a basement and it's an area of high radon exposure, you want to make sure that it's got a mitigation system. And that mitigation system has been tested within the last 2 years. Lots of people have the system and never get them tested. Property has high experience in damaging winds. We talked about that. Again, given the age of the property, which we believe is to be 18 years old, when was the last time the water heater was replaced? Most of them last 8 to 12 years. 12, you've gotten your money's worth. 8, well, you just went past the warranty. Furnace is probably as old as the house, and they last 15 to 20 years. So that might be something that's coming up for replacement. So you'd want to ask about the furnace, how well has it been maintained, those types of things. Fireplaces, those just increase your insurance costs, even though they're plenty, they're very lovely. And no solar panels on the property, at least that we could detect. So that's what we come out of the chute with for the buyer.
So let's say I showed up at an open house with this list of questions. Could you actually answer these questions?
If I had answers for those questions, it would be information that I had gotten from the seller.
Okay.
Not necessarily anything that I've done, because at least in the state of Iowa, I am not required to do that kind of research to identify deficiencies in a property. But if I know about it, I'm required to share it.
Okay. Do you think that realtors would be resistant to these questions, or do you think that if I ask them, they have to answer them as best as they can?
Well, some would be resistant and some would probably not want this information because they don't want to know things. But then there will be other realtors and their sellers that want to know things so they can address them up front before you're, halfway down the road in your transaction, and then something comes up and blows up your transaction then. So I think it's kind of a human nature sort of question.
Yep.
Right?
This is where your sociology background comes in, or social worker
does.
comes in helpful.
Yeah, exactly.
So how do we do on the questions? Does this fit with what you know about the property?
All except for one thing.
We'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
Was that from a hail?
Hail events, yep.
Okay. Next section we get to is the inspector lens. So let's say you've decided I'm going to make an offer on this property. I'm going to get it inspected. Whether you have a contingency or not, you still want to hand this to the inspector, because here's something I didn't know is I bought a lot of houses. The inspector actually works for the buyer and not for the seller.
Absolutely.
What you do is take this and hand it to the inspector and say, make sure you check these things so I get a good answer on these things. So again, it's a lot of repetition from the first section. Check for missing or torn shingles because of the roof issues. Check the downspouts. Look for shingle damage. Look for gutter damage. Look for gutter guards. The frozen pipe concerns. It's Iowa. It gets cold. Check the basement. Check the foundation. Radon exposure is not normally a test that a inspector will give.
Yeah, actually, our inspectors here all offer radon inspection as part of their packages.
Right. If they offer it, then take it for this location.
Yep. Anyway.
It's funny. I bought a house in Minnesota. Same family owned it for almost 80 years, and they had a radon problem and didn't know about it until we got the test on it. And unfortunately, they're suffering the impacts from that and are not in great health because of it, which is sad.
Yep.
Yeah. Damaging wind. Check when the water heater was last replaced. Check the furnace and check the fireplace, the basics. And then the next that we have is the insurance lens. So John, why don't you walk us through this?
The insurance lens looks at, the factors that are going to influence the price that you have for insurance. So the fact that it's got hail exposure, and as we now know, we've had the roof replaced once, that's going to cost you a little bit more just because of that. Finished basements, those are going to be, either included in the square foot or added to the square foot. So that's going to cost you a little bit more. Damaging winds, we know that. Property is over 18 years old. If it's over 10 years old, it's going to cost a little bit more because when it gets rebuilt, it's got to be built to current code. And that typically always costs more. Property has at least one fireplace. Fireplaces, like I said, are lovely. But the more of them you have, the more it's going to cost on your insurance. And then the property has an estimated replacement cost of $373,000. Should it have an untimely demise to rebuild the property, is going to be about that much. About 70% of properties in the U.S. have a replacement cost that is higher than their market value. And so people who insure need to insure to at least the replacement cost to make sure that they're covered.
Especially in some older homes, the cost to replace them outstrips the coverage. And at this price, the coverage A is probably right in line with the selling price of the house, so it's probably fine, but it's something to be aware of because these keep going up quite a bit. So now we get to the property data, which is pulled from a combination of MLS and assessor data. When it was built, there's an attached garage, there's a basement. So nothing in here is on, it has forced air, natural gas, central cooling. It's on a public sewer, which is lovely. Primarily fiber cement siding. It's a ranch style house. Roof's about 2,800 square feet. It's in Ankeny City and Polk County in Iowa. Here's the most recent listing, and here's a cheat code. So the one thing we'll discover in a minute is that we don't have building permits for Ankeny, Iowa. We look at two different sources to get them, but we don't have them. And so one of the ways to sort of get around that is to put the fact that the roof was replaced in the description, and then our AI will pick it up and say it's a brand new roof. So
Good
that's
to know.
Yeah, that's one of the things that if work's been done and you're not sure exactly how to express it, just put it in the description, and the AI will pick it up and age
Okay.
everything appropriately. It's on a golf course. Since it's named Pinehurst Circle, it's not a surprise, I suppose. And then it was listed for $453,000 in February. It looks like it's pending right now.
It
So
is.
congratulations.
Thank you.
Looks like the original owners bought it in 2013 and sold it in 2025. Property taxes have been relatively flat for the time. Here's all the pictures. It looks lovely. When they did the roof, did they also renovate the inside, or is this sort of original equipment?
They did not renovate the inside.
Okay, so here's the roof condition. And what we do is a couple of things. We look for how long the average roof's life is in different areas. So in Iowa, it's 26 years for a shingle roof. Since we don't have any permit data to tell us that the property was updated, we go back to the original date of the home. So that's why the roof span, the roof life is different, and it costs between $11,000 and $24,000 to replace it. There's a wide variety depending upon demand. If after a hail event, it's a surge event, so you're probably paying closer to the top rather than the bottom. And John and I get this argument all the time. He's like, "How can this roof be 18 years old and be in great condition?" And that's how, because we don't have any indicator to say that it's been replaced.
Exactly. Right.
And this is a medium risk exposure. Some areas of the country will have really incredible amounts of stuff coming out of the sky. This isn't too bad, although it did have a hailstorm that replaced them. Here's the damaging events. Was this the event here? 2024 July?
You know what? I don't even know for sure which event it was. Her insurance company contacted her.
Oh.
Yeah.
And proactively replaced it.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
That's wonderful.
Given how good that roof is, it's got to be the 2024. Here's part of our argument.
Well, I know it was done in 2024. I just don't know which event.
Yeah.
Because we had a bunch of summers in a row where there was some event or another.
Yeah, you can see the roof looks slightly different from 2023 to 2024.
Yeah.
And we go back as far as we can. If there's a little cloud here, it means there was an event that we flew over afterwards. But August 2024 is the most recent event that we have. And here's where we see there's no permits for this location. But permits are required for most work in Ankeny. So sometimes if it's like for like, it's not required. The question is just ask for a roof permit. Was the roof permitted? Was the replacement permitted? And is there a warranty? on the
Right.
roof, because that's pretty valuable when
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
sell for the new owner. If there's another event, then it's covered under warranty, and you don't have to file an insurance claim.
Right.
We don't have homeowner service. This is the future. This is the future.
Okay.
We look at electricity costs, relatively modest for this location. Mid-American Energy is the provider.
Right. Yep.
Here's the carbon footprint. If you want to sign up for service, you just click the Get Service button. Solar is, for this size system, it's a long payback, and most people don't want to take that long of a payback.
And they always complicate the sale when there's solar
Yeah.
in place. Always complicates it.
If there's panels in place, we'll flag it, and the question is it leased or is it owned? If it's
Bingo.
owned, easier. If it's leased, then it's
Yeah.
a pain in the neck.
Yep.
Then we look at the risks. John, why don't you walk us through this?
Sure. So from the exposure standpoint, winter risk we've already talked about, hail risk we've already talked about. There is some pollution risk, and there is definitely some wind risk. Drought, lightning, tornado, those are all associated with or without convective storms. Not going to be concerned about a wildfire in your golf course. It's not going to happen there. So, and if you get an earthquake, it will be news. Everybody will
The
be
whole world's in trouble.
Hey, Michigan.
On the flip side, on the plus side, you're also not in or near a 100-year flood zone or a 500-year flood zone. So, insurance is not required and you're not very close to one. So again, not a concern for that, which is always good. And then, we break these things out to give you a little bit more detail as to what the percentage of risk is, what the last event was, all of those types of things to just give you a little bit more knowledge. On the environmental side, the pollution that was flagging was radon. And, definitely concerned, particularly in the Midwest, especially because you've got basements. Mold index is average, termites is average. So I would be asking, to have somebody take a look for termites.
That's actually in our purchase agreement in this market, that the sellers will pay to have a termite inspection done.
Perfect. Because it's definitely something that is needed. On the plus side, not near any brownfields, not near any super funds, not near any PFAs, not near any leaking underground storage tanks. So plenty of things on the plus side there you're so far away from them, they don't even score. Nothing of note there. One former clandestine drug lab. We do not tell you where they are open and serving. We're not in the distribution business. But oddly, we've had a customer run a report and find out that the property they were looking at was a former meth lab. And there's all sorts of things associated with that.
Yeah, that wasn't disclosed.
Yeah.
That most people do not want to be involved with.
Finally, we get into insurability and claims. We expect the premium to be somewhere between $1,500 and $2,400 a year for this location. With the recent event, it may change, but that's based upon a replacement cost of about $373,000 and a $223 per square foot replacement cost. Hail is the big risk that you're going to have in that area that potentially drives things up. If you want to get a quote, you can click on this button and get a quote. We don't have claim history here. That's a future event.
Okay.
And then we get into the neighborhood. It's green, so it's a low risk neighborhood. Some's a little bit more elevated than others. Larceny seems to be average, but the U.S. is generally a very safe place. If this is not an F, then it's really not that much to worry about. Here's the location of the nearest sex offender and the address. So it's across the freeway. So careful, kids. Don't go across the freeway. Fire protection is good. You're close to a fire hydrant. You've got a lot of hydrants around here. There's a bunch of fire stations within 5 and 10 miles. And you've got police station a couple miles away. Nearest fire station is 2 miles away. A lot of times the inspector needs to know this. Like, how far is the closest fire station?
Right.
This is the blended station, which is full-time during the day, usually volunteer at night, or some sort of a combined station, or minimal staffing at night. Closest urgent care for people who are concerned about those sorts of things, and closest hospital is about 10 miles away. And then finally, we dump it all into a timeline, so you can see exactly what happened when, and off we go. How'd we do?
I think overall, really good. It hit almost everything, right?
Yeah, I wish we had that. I still wish we had that that permit for the roof, but
Right?
it happens. So, as an agent or as a broker, and I'm not sure if your opinion would differ with one role versus the other, and I'm sure the compliance person in you right now is like, "Oh, be still my beating heart." How would an agent versus a broker look at this?
Well, they shouldn't look at it any differently because we hold the same license. I just have extra hours on top,
Okay.
Um, and we all still fall under the same code of ethics and the same state laws. So an agent and a broker should be looking at it the same way. I think as a broker, my advice is always going to be, what does your client want you to do? So if I'm a listing agent and you say, hey, Mr. Seller, I've got this cool program that I can find out all this stuff that a buyer might be looking at and finding out about your house. Do you want us to do that? And if a seller says, yeah, no, I'd rather not know if there's stuff I don't already know, because then I know I'm required to disclose it. I think it's something we have to do in conjunction with our clients. And again, as I said earlier, we here are not required as a buyer's agent or even as a listing agent to do research on our own to discover material defects that require disclosure.
Doesn't that set up like a lot of post-settlement issues, though, if this stuff turns up eventually?
Yeah, it totally could. In fact, I mentioned to my boss something about this, and she says, "Ooh, I got to think about this for a little bit, because I wonder what kind of liability it might put us in if we know this program's available to a buyer and we don't offer it to them." So, there's a lot of interesting legal conversations, I think, to have around this.
The answer is a ton, by the way. It's a ton.
Yeah.
My
There's a ton.
non-legal opinion.
Yes. Exactly. There's a ton. So yeah, it's fascinating to me. And I think it's a great program. If a buyer finds it and wants to do it, obviously I'm not going to tell them not to, right?
Mhm.
But do I advise a seller to do it ahead of time? Again, I think I discuss the pros and cons and the potential legal ramifications and let them make that decision themselves.
Okay, here's where we get to the summary part of our show. Check. So, knowing what we showed you for 228 Northeast Pinehurst Circle in Ankeny, Iowa, what are the top 3 things you'd be looking for in this property
As a buyer,
as a buyer?
it would be age of mechanicals. I would want to know if anything had been replaced, knowing that it's sitting right at that age. I would want to know about, had there been roof replacement, because you can't get up and see the roof. You can walk around the outside of the house and see what kind of shape the siding's in, but you don't know about the roof. And that might be something you want to know before you write an offer, and then wait for your home inspector to discover that for you. Third, I don't know. I honestly can't come up with a third one that I think would have been important to know ahead of time. I think everything else is pretty self-evident. In this particular home, there's already a radon mitigation system in place. And it's got the little meter thing on the side that shows that it's supposedly still working. Obviously,
Nice.
that would be advice I would give to a buyer, to have your inspector make sure that that is really working.
Excellent. So, John, if you were looking to buy 228 Northeast Pinehurst Circle in Ankeny, Iowa, what would be the top 3 things that you're looking for?
The first thing I would look for is the roof, right? It looks like it's in super great shape, so we know from this discussion, we know it's not 18 years old. It's closer to 1 year old. Is there a warranty? What type of shingles went on to it? Were they, regular shingles or fortified shingles? I want to know about the roof. Second thing that I want to know about is to make sure that the mitigation system from the radon is cranking away and doing its job. So, and when was the last time it was inspected? And then the third thing I want to look at is, we know the water heater probably has been replaced at least once, maybe twice. So how old is the water heater? And the furnace is, nearing the end of its days. Has it been replaced? Or if it hasn't, how much longer do I have until I have to replace it?
Okay, if I were looking at 228 Northeast Pinehurst Circle in Ankeny, Iowa, lovely Ankeny, Iowa, I might add, I'd say a couple of things. Number one, of course, is the mechanicals. It looks like some of these are a bit long on the tooth. Is that true or is that not true? We don't have any indication that it hasn't happened. The second is, if the roof has been replaced, which it has, is there a permit for it? Is the work permitted? Because we don't have permits for Ankeny. It doesn't mean they don't exist. It's just they're not in a way that we can get them. So to make sure that work was permitted. And then the third thing is, what are you doing to protect against the hail and wind risks in Iowa? Is there anything that you've done to help prepare for that? But otherwise, it's a beautiful place. It's on a golf course. Can you jump over the fence and play on the golf course? Is probably the fourth thing I would ask. But there's no question why this sold so quickly. It's a lovely home. It's in great shape. And I would look at the PropertyLens report as hey, these are things I still want to ask, but most of it's covered. It's a great place. So I'd sleep better at night knowing I had that report and I asked all the right questions. That makes my transaction that much easier.
It would be interesting to know, and maybe you've had home inspectors on your show before. It'd be interesting to know their thoughts about it, because some of them get a little prickly when you start asking them questions, because their job is to find out all this stuff. That would be fascinating to me to know.
We've had a couple of inspectors on the show, and listen, inspectors are a series of unique individual characteristics, shall we say. And some people, you're right, they don't want you messing with it's like, just leave the house and I'll show up in a couple of hours and I'll tell you everything. What we've seen so far is that this is an upsell opportunity for some inspectors to say, hey, if there wasn't a radon system in the house, then you really need to get a check because this area needed it. Or this roof, if I didn't know it was replaced, probably needs a little bit closer look because I don't know how old it is. So let's verify everything. So it like anything, it's just like with the real estate agent. Some people love it and some people don't, because it exposes things that maybe people don't want to talk about, or they don't want to know it. We're big believers in transparency. The more you can uncover, the better. But yeah, whenever there's something new in the real estate industry, it takes a little bit of time for people to get used to it.
Yeah. It's a great product, I think.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that. We worked hard to build it. This has been our dream to build for maybe 10 years. We just finally.
Really? Wow.
Oh yeah. We started a company that did natural hazard risk assessment. And we always thought consumers really need to have this because, for example, did they put class 4 shingles on the roof in Iowa if they've had hail damage or put some sort of hail resistant roofing on the property? It's a big question to know because it's going to protect you against the next time. And
right.
Most people don't think about it, and we obsess about it, which makes people think that we're very boring at parties because all we do is tell you what's wrong.
No, we are very boring.
So I would like to thank our wonderful guest, Jeanne Glaser from Keller Williams in Des Moines, Iowa. If you're in the Des Moines area and you're looking to sell a house, call Jeanne first because she's now a friend of the program. And she may take your business. She may not, but she's very busy these days. So thank you so much for being part of our show.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
And for Property of the Week, I'm Bob Frady.
I'm John Sigmund.
See you next time.